Sometimes the most revealing moments happen when nobody expects them. Not during a big interview. Not during a scripted bit. Just a glance across a studio desk, a joke that lands a little too well, a silence that says more than the dialogue around it. That's the kind of moment that made so many people fall for Kelly Ripa and Mark Consuelos as a couple long before they ever thought of themselves as fans of a morning show. Because here's the thing about live television, you can't fake chemistry for that long. Not really. Not for years, not for decades, not with cameras rolling every single weekday morning while two people who are also raising kids, running a household and building separate careers sit 2 feet apart and try to be funny, honest and present all at once. Eventually the mask slips. Eventually you see who two people actually are with each other. And what audiences have seen over and over is a couple that still seems to enjoy being in the same room. That's rarer than it sounds. Think about how many public partnerships, even ones with genuine affection at their core, start to feel performative under that kind of sustained attention. The warmth becomes a brand. The banter becomes a bit. But with Kelly and Mark, viewers keep pointing to the same thing. It still looks unscripted. The eye rolls are real. The interruptions are real. The way Mark will glance at Kelly right before he says something he knows will get a reaction. That's not written into a rundown. That's a marriage playing out in real time, on camera, whether either of them planned it that way or not. Why does that matter to people watching from their kitchens and cars and break rooms every morning? Because most long marriages don't get applause. They get groceries and school pickups and disagreements about the thermostat. Nobody's watching. There's no studio audience clapping when a couple makes it through a hard year. So when viewers see two people who've been together since the 90s still teasing each other, still finishing each other's sentences, still occasionally getting mildly annoyed on live television and recovering with a laugh, it lands as something quietly reassuring. It's proof, or at least it feels like proof, that ordinary long-term love can still look like that after this many years. There's also something in the specific texture of how they disagree. Kelly will push back on Mark mid-story. Mark will call her out for exaggerating. Neither of them smooths it over immediately. There's a beat where the tension is allowed to just sit there, unresolved, before the room deflates it with a joke. That's a very particular kind of intimacy. Couples who are performing closeness tend to resolve conflict instantly, almost nervously. Couples who trust each other let it breathe a little first. People have also noticed how differently they each handle vulnerability. Mark tends to be the one who says the quietly emotional thing out loud, a comment about missing the kids or about time moving faster than he expected. Kelly is often the one who deflects it with humor in the moment, then circles back to it later, more seriously, once the joke has done its job of making the emotion bearable. Watch enough episodes and that rhythm becomes familiar. It starts to feel less like a bit and more like a genuine coping mechanism two people built together over years of practice. None of this is really about show business. It's about what long-term partnership actually requires. The willingness to be slightly annoying to each other in public, the comfort of not performing constant harmony, the shared references that only make sense to two people who've logged that much time together. Viewers pick up on all of it, even if they couldn't name exactly why a particular exchange made them smile. There's also a quieter thread running underneath all of it. Two competitive, ambitious people who chose, again and again, not to let their careers become a wedge between them. Mark has talked about stepping back from certain roles earlier in their marriage so their family life could stay steady. Kelly has talked about how much that mattered to her, not as a grand sacrifice, but as an ordinary daily choice repeated often enough that it became the shape of their relationship. That's not a dramatic headline. But it's arguably the real foundation underneath every playful morning exchange people love watching. Maybe that's the actual reason so many viewers stay invested. Not the jokes, not the outfits, not even the show itself, but the sense that they're watching two people who chose each other consistently, in small ways for a very long time, and are still choosing each other now. And maybe that's why moments like this stay with people long after the segment ends. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because it looked, for a few unguarded seconds, exactly like a real marriage, the kind most of us are quietly trying to build for ourselves. Script 2. Lola Consuelos, stepping into her own spotlight. It wasn't a big announcement that first got people paying attention to Lola Consuelos. It was something smaller, a moment where she talked, almost offhandedly, about what it's actually like being the daughter of two people everyone in America seems to recognize on sight. Growing up as a Ripa Consuelos kid means growing up with an unusual kind of visibility. Not fame exactly, not in the way her parents experience it, but proximity to fame which comes with its own strange pressures. Every school event, every college decision, every early career step gets filtered through a public lens that most 20-somethings never have to think about. And what's interesting is watching how Lola has talked about navigating that, because it doesn't sound like resentment. It sounds like someone figuring out, in real time, how much of her parents' spotlight she wants to stand in versus how much she wants to build something separate. That's a genuinely difficult balance. Children of famous parents tend to get stuck between two unfair narratives. Either they're accused of coasting on a recognizable last name, or they're expected to actively distance themselves from it to prove they earned whatever they achieve on their own. Lola seems to have found a third way, which is simply talking about her family honestly, without either leaning on it or performing independence from it. She'll mention her parents warmly, the way anyone would mention their parents, without treating it as either a burden or a brand. That matters more than it might seem. Audiences are unusually sensitive to authenticity right now, especially from people who grew up around fame. There's a real fatigue with manufactured humility, the carefully rehearsed, "I'm just like everyone else" routine. What tends to land instead is something more specific. An actual sense of a young person's personality, her humor, her music, her own opinions, distinct from her parents' public personas even when she's standing right next to them. Kelly and Mark, for their part, have talked about trying to keep their kids' upbringing as grounded as possible despite the visibility of their jobs. Regular chores, regular consequences, regular pushback when the kids got too comfortable assuming anyone cared who their parents were. Whether or not that fully worked is something only the family really knows. But it's noticeable, watching Lola in interviews or clips, that she doesn't carry herself like someone who expects special treatment. She carries herself like someone still figuring out who she wants to be, publicly and privately, at an age when most people are doing exactly that, just without cameras around. There's something almost universal underneath the specific, unusual circumstances of her life. Every young adult eventually has to answer the question of how much of their identity comes from their family and how much is genuinely their own. Most people get to work that out privately over years without anyone watching. Lola has to work it out with an audience already paying attention, ready to project meaning onto whatever she does next. A song, a photo, a comment in an interview. Maybe that's part of why people find her compelling to watch, beyond simple curiosity about Ripa's kid. There's something relatable in watching someone try to separate their own identity from an inherited spotlight, even if most of us never have to do it under quite so much scrutiny. It's the universal project of becoming yourself, just with higher stakes and a bigger audience. And maybe that's ultimately the more interesting story than any single headline about her. Not who her parents are, but who she's actively choosing to become despite and sometimes because of that inheritance. Script 3. Raising Kids in the Spotlight, How Kelly and Mark Protected Their Family's Privacy. Before the conversation even ended, audiences sensed there was something deeper underneath it. A running thread Kelly and Mark have returned to for years in different forms on different mornings. The deliberate, ongoing work of keeping their kids' lives as normal as possible inside a very abnormal amount of public attention. It's easy to underestimate how hard that actually is. When both parents work in front of cameras, when the family's daily life becomes casual conversation material on live television, the instinct from the outside might be that privacy simply isn't possible anymore. But Kelly and Mark have talked, repeatedly, about drawing a clear line between what they'll share and what belongs only to their family, and holding that line even when it would have been easy or even lucrative not to. That distinction says something about their values that's easy to miss if you're only half paying attention. Kelly is famous partly because she shares her life so openly. It's the format of her show, the tone of her whole public persona. And yet she and Mark have consistently protected specific things. Their kids' major life moments, their harder family conversations, the ordinary friction of parenting 3 kids into adulthood. They'll mention it happened. They rarely narrate the details. Why does that restraint matter to viewers? Because it demonstrates something audiences don't always get to see from public families. The idea that visibility and privacy aren't actually opposites. You can be a known, recognizable, deeply public person and still protect the people you love from becoming content. That's a harder needle to thread than it sounds, especially when audience appetite for family details is part of what built the platform in the first place. There's also something worth noticing in how the kids themselves have responded to growing up this way. None of the 3 Consuelo's children appear to have rebelled against their parents' visibility in any dramatic, headline-generating way. No public estrangement, no bitter interviews about a difficult childhood in the spotlight. Instead, what comes through when any of them do speak publicly is something closer to comfort. An ease with who their parents are, in public and private, that suggests whatever balance Kelly and Mark struck actually worked reasonably well. That's worth sitting with for a moment, because it's not the default outcome for celebrity families. Fame puts enormous pressure on ordinary parenting decisions. How much to shield kids, how much to let them exist normally, how to handle the moment a child is old enough to have their own public presence separate from yours. Getting that balance even mostly right over the course of raising 3 kids to adulthood is a genuine achievement, even if it never gets covered as one. Maybe the reason so many people remain invested in Kelly&Mark isn't simply because they've spent decades in the spotlight. It's because audiences continue to see something genuine in the way they've protected their family while still, somehow, remaining completely public people. It's a kind of quiet consistency that's easy to overlook and hard to actually pull off. And maybe that's the real story underneath all the morning show banter and years of headlines. Not a couple performing a happy family for the cameras, but 2 people who figured out, imperfectly and deliberately, how to raise their kids mostly out of frame, even while standing, every single morning, directly in it.